all. We're ready to begin our Torah class. And today's Torah portion is Emor, which is chapter 21 in the book of Leviticus. It actually is 3 chapters long. It's chapter 21, 4, I'm sorry, 21, 22, 23, and 24. 4 chapters in the book of Leviticus. If you're in the Blue Oscar Chumash, you can find it all on page 672. So the name of the Torah portion is Emor. Emor means to say or to speak. And it begins with the instruction that says, Hashem told Moshe, say or speak to the Kohanim, who are the sons of Aharon, his brother Aaron, and say to them, do not become contaminated, defiled, by coming into contact with a dead person, with a corpse. So we know that the Kohanim had many restrictions. And here is the first instruction to the Kohanim, that they may not come into contact with the dead. We know there are 7 exceptions, which is the next verse that says to your flesh, which is your spouse, your mother, your father, your son, your daughter, or your brother, or your sister who's not married. Those are the 7 relatives. And as you surely know, this law is in effect until today. When Kohanim go to a cemetery, they're restricted about where they can go. Many times you'll come to a funeral and you'll see the body is inside the chapel and they're doing a service, and the Kohanim will be standing outside. Many funeral homes, especially religious neighborhoods, have a speaker system outside so the Kohanim could hear the eulogies outdoors. They're not allowed to be in the same room with the corpse. There's rules about where they can go in the cemetery, on the road, not near the graves. You have to know the rules, where you may or may not go, but Kohanim still observe this extra level degree of holiness. Now, this is a long discussion in itself. What's wrong with coming into a proximity with a corpse? So every one of us is alive. When we're alive, we're connected to God because a part of God is inside of us. When the soul leaves the body, there is a void of holiness because the soul departed the body, and therefore there is an impurity that descends or consumes the body, and therefore the body is considered ritually unclean. And a Kohen cannot come into contact with a corpse, with a dead person. There is one other exception besides the 7 relatives, and that is something called a met mitzvah. If there's someone who there's no one around to tend to their burial, that is a special mitzvah to take care of their burial arrangements, and the Kohen may become in contact with the dead body, even though he becomes unclean, and he has to go through a process of purification. But this is just the first restriction that a Kohen has. When you read the Torah portion on, there are many other rules that a Kohen must abide by. So, for example, there are restrictions about marriage, and I don't want to get into all the details. I want to look at the big picture, but you could read the Torah portion, who they're allowed to marry, who not allowed to marry. For example, a Kohen cannot marry a divorced woman. That's why when a Kohen gets his get, there's a longer process to give him time to make sure he wants to do this, because he cannot remarry the woman he divorced or any other divorced woman. A Kohen Gadol, which is the high priest, cannot even marry a widow, as is stated here. But again, without getting into all the reasons now for this, it basically is saying that a Kohen has to conduct themselves on a higher level of sanctity and holiness. And one pragmatic reason I once heard why a Kohen can't marry a divorced woman is that sometimes Kohanim would counsel people. They were the religious leaders, and maybe a Kohen would be interested in a woman, thinking, oh, she's having marriage problems, whatever it may be. Maybe there could be sometimes there's something the statistics about whether it's mental health professionals or clergy, or sometimes get interested in people that are counseling because they're showing them so much compassion. There could be a bonding. So here the Torah makes all of that all off limits. But be that as it may, the general gist, obviously, is that Kohanim have a higher focus in their lives. They are the priests. They serve in the temple. They're holy people, holier than the rest of the nation, and their responsibility and job is to elevate the nation of Israel to a higher relationship with God. When the Jew would go to the temple, he would encounter the Kohen who would lead them in the services and the sacrificial services and try to raise up their spiritual consciousness to connect with God. And therefore, they had to be models of higher levels of spirituality and holiness, and they were not engaged in many of the mundane activities of the rest of the nation. They did not do farming, agricultural. They didn't own land in Israel. Their focus was the spiritual focus. Now, why is this so interesting for all of us? I'm assuming most of us are not Kohanim, a very small percentage, maybe 5% of people are Kohanim today, descendants of Aaron. So why is this pertinent and relevant to every one of us? And the answer is because when God gave us the Torah, God made the following statement. God said, "V'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim." You shall be to me a nation, a kingdom of priests, meaning that every Jew is a Kohen. What does it mean that every Jew is a Kohen? Just like the Kohen are the spiritual leaders of the nation of Israel, we are meant to be the leaders to the rest of the world. Just like the Kohanim elevate the spiritual consciousness and attachment to God amongst the people of Israel, we have to be those who elevate and draw all the nations to a relationship with God. And that's what Torah mitzvahs are, a way of connecting God with man through the commandments and the rituals and the observances. I just want to take the word Kohen very literal. You know, people translate it as a priest. But the word kahen, or in the Torah, lechahen, it says lechahen li. Kahen or kohen means to serve, that they shall administer, they shall serve me in the temple. So literally the word kohen means a servant. Now we all know leadership is about serving the people and serving God. And you serve the people by connecting them to Hashem. So when we say all of the Jewish people are a kingdom of priests, we are meant to serve God in this world and serve our fellow man and bring man and God into a relationship with one another. And as the Kohanim have many restrictions, as we see in this week's Torah portion, the Jewish people on a whole are a priestly nation, and we have many restrictions. We have to eat certain foods, kosher. We have mitzvot that we have to perform, forbidden relationships. So all of this on a miniature level, the Kohanim are the ultimate servants of God, but we are all Kohanim, servants of God. So the opening of this week's Torah portion is about the Kohanim, also about the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, who is anointed to be the high priest, and their service in the Holy Temple. So, from the subject of the Kohanim, the Torah then transitions into the laws of who may bring sacrifices into the temple and what sacrifices are permissible to be brought into the temple, and how you're not allowed to bring a sacrifice that has a blemish on it. And once again, indicating that not just the Kohanim, but every Jew has a higher level of spiritual responsibilities and must seek a service of God that is perfection, like no, without blemish. Now, today we don't have sacrifices, but our service, we have to strive that our service of God should be without blemish. So we know that prayer is a substitute for sacrifices, right? So for example, if during your prayers you talk to someone and you interrupt your prayers with mundane conversations, that could be a offering with a blemish. Or if you give charity, but you give it from funds that weren't earned honestly, that could be a sacrifice that has a blemish. So in the literal sense, it means the animal can't have a blemish. But what it means for all of us on a daily basis is that our deeds, our actions, our service of God, because we're all Kohanim, ministers serving God and higher and connecting to God on a higher spiritual plane through special laws and even restrictions as a Jewish nation to maintain a higher level of holiness and sanctity, that our service should be without blemish, without any mum. And it could be a defect in the physical or also in the motivation, right? The motivation or the intent could be lacking and therefore be blemished in some way. But I think it all comes to a head with the punchline that after it talks about the Kohanim and the high priest and the rules of service and how who may come with an offering and what the offering is allowed to be and shouldn't have without any blemish and many other rules about how to serve God in the temple. Here's the a key verse, and it says this follows: you should guard my commandments, observe my commandments, and perform them. I am God. And then it says the following, and this is a very, very fundamental, overarching commandment. V'lo techalalu, you should not desecrate my holy name, but rather I should be sanctified among the children of Israel. I am Hashem who sanctifies you. This verse, our rabbis say, is one of the most important rules. As a matter of fact, our rabbis say that one of the sins that are almost unforgivable is desecration of God's name, because it's almost impossible to repair the damage. Now notice it says, do not desecrate my holy name. Now what is a name? We all have a name. Our name is our identity. It's our reputation. So when your name is said, it's for other people to relate to you. So when they think of your name, what comes to mind? Do they think of a good person, a righteous person, a kind, compassionate, or God forbid, the opposite? Well, just like we have a name, which is our reputation, which is our most valuable possession, is our reputation, right? At the end of our lives, the only thing that lives on is our reputation, the name we earned in this world, how we're thought of and remembered. God has a name. Now, God is beyond time or space. He's infinite. He's not corporeal, but he has a name, God. And that name and that reputation in the world, God says, is very much dependent on the Jewish people. Because since God chose an intimate relationship with the Jewish people, he gave us our Torah. As we know, we're counting the Omer, making our way from Passover to Shavuot, when we received the Torah, and God conferred on us to the responsibility to be his chosen people and to sanctify his name in this world and to be a kingdom of priests. Therefore, his reputation rides on us more than anyone else. And therefore, God says, make sure that your actions, your deeds, always bring honor, holiness, and not desecration to my name. So when a Jew acts in a righteous, noble, pious way that earns the esteem, the respect, the honor, the appreciation of his fellow man, then that brings sanctification to God's name. But when a Jew acts in a way that's immoral or unethical, or that brings desecration to God's name. So we have a tremendous responsibility to carry ourselves in a way that will always bring Kiddush Hashem. Everyone knows one of the holiest prayers in Judaism is the Kaddish. Kaddish means sanctification. What is the opening sentence of Kaddish? Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shmei Rabbi. Every Jew knows those 4 words. What does it mean? Yitgadal, may it become great. V'yitkadash, may it become sanctified. Shmei Rabbi, your great name. What are we praying for? We're praying for a world in which God's name will be sanctified. What does it mean, sanctified? So what is the greatest blemish? Or what is the greatest stain? Or what is the most damaging thing to God's reputation? Evil. When people see evil, they see human beings who are created by God in the image of God acting in a way that's evil. When they see pain and suffering and inhumanity and tragedy and misfortune, they say, where is God? How could God, a loving God, allow this? And therefore, it's a form of disgrace. We don't think of October 7th as a day of Chilul Hashem, desecration of God's name. But since the Holocaust, the day of the greatest Chilul Hashem, perhaps, was October 7th. 9/11 was another example of a day of Chilul Hashem, desecration of God's name. When human beings act the way they acted, and it's almost hard to call them human beings to see, what the Hamas terrorists did on October 7th, burning babies alive and all the horrific things, the rapes, the tortures, the beheadings, the atrocities that were just so gruesome and horrific. And you say, God, are these your creations? Are these your human beings that you created? Do they have a divine soul inside of them? It's the ultimate desecration of God's name. But we as a Jewish people, since October 7th, as we stood up, and today's Israel's Independence Day, so it's most befitting, when we stand up and fight this evil, and all the sacrifice that the soldiers made, the selfless, yesterday was Yom HaZikaron, they have remembrance, selflessly sacrificing their lives to rescue others, to protect and defend others, strangers who went into the kibbutzim to rescue lives and gave their lives. That's the opposite. That's the greatest Kiddush Hashem. It shows the capacity of love, of goodness, of righteousness, of self-sacrifice, of selflessness. So we saw the worst evil of humanity and the greatest righteousness. So what we are doing in a post-October 7th world, whether it's with Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran, is the greatest Kiddush Hashem. It's the reversal of the greatest Chilul Hashem. They created the greatest desecration of God's name by acting the way they acted. And we, the Jewish people, are creating the greatest Kiddush Hashem. And today's, Yom Ha'atzmaut, and many people are saying, well, how do you celebrate Israel's Independence Day in such a tragic time? 134 hostages are still in captivity, and so much grief and so much sorrow and so much pain and so much loss. And clearly it's a very muted Yom Ha'atzmaut today. But if there is something to celebrate, it's the valor, it's the courage, it's the selflessness, it's the love, it's the unity, it's the generosity. It is this Kiddush Hashem that we're making every day. And as we witness the greatest darkness of Chilul Hashem, that greatest desecration of God's name that occurred on October 7th, before our eyes, before the eyes of the world, we have an opportunity to make a Kiddush Hashem. When we show the world, yes, human beings are capable of such evil, but they're also capable of the greatest goodness. When you look at all the brave soldiers, and you look at all the brave souls who gave their lives, and yesterday was Yom HaZikaron, most righteous, wonderful human beings who sacrificed their lives to save others. That's a Kiddush Hashem. Every day we carry on this Kiddush Hashem, and that's really the essence of the Torah portion. What does it mean to be a holy person? It means that all your actions are for a higher purpose, to connect to God. And you, through your life, create Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name. There are obviously countless stories that could be told of Kiddush Hashem that run through all the generations of Jewish history, including our very current day and age, of Jews who make Kiddush Hashem. And it doesn't have to mean you die, God forbid, sacrificing your life. It could be as simple as an act of kindness to your fellow man, a kind gesture, being honest in business, right? I mean, the smallest things can make Kiddush Hashem. Anytime someone says, wow, look at that person, how wonderful they are, look what they've done. Could be smiling at somebody, holding a door for somebody, any act of thoughtfulness, of kindness that says, wow, this is what a human being could and should be, especially as a Jew who studies Torah and performs mitzvot. That's what Kiddush Hashem means. It doesn't have to be something monumental and earth-shattering and headline-grabbing. Every moment of our lives, every day, we have countless opportunities to make Kiddush Hashem. And yes, God says, I stake my reputation on you, on the Jewish people. And I just want to say that Yom Ha'atzmaut is the day that we came back in 1948. And I mentioned in my video this morning that Atzmaut also has the word etzem, bones in it. And it reminds me of the prophecy of Ezekiel. You could look it up. Ezekiel, chapter 37. It's a famous, famous prophecy called the Valley of the Dry Bones, where after the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, God takes Ezekiel into a valley of dry bones, and he says, can these bones live again? And Ezekiel says, only you know, God. And then suddenly there's a rattling and a noise, and the bones start clinging one to another, and they start growing sinews and flesh and veins, and they stand up. And God says, you see this entire nation, this population, the nations of the world said they're lost, they're cut off, they're gone. But I will open up their graves and take them out of their graves and bring them to the land that I promised to their ancestors. Return them. God told this to Ezekiel after the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, going back over 2,500 years ago. But it happened again in our generation, after the mounds of bones of corpses in the Holocaust, 6 million. And the world thought that's the end of the Jewish people. That was the plan. And what did God do? He opened up our graves and brought us back to the land of Israel, and we will live again in the land of Israel as God promised. That moment in 1948, the return to Israel, was a moment of Kiddush Hashem. The whole world stood back and said, wow, the prophecies are true. It's real. God promised this 2,500 years ago, and it happened literally from the graves and the crematoriums of Auschwitz and Treblinka and Buchenwald and all of the killing camps. The Jews came back to life and came back to the land of Israel, just as it was predicted in the Torah, first in the book of Deuteronomy, and then through the prophet Ezekiel, the valley of the dry bones. So that's Kiddush Hashem. The Jewish people's story is one big Kiddush Hashem, because nobody could explain how it is that the Jewish people are still here. How is it that we've survived through all the generations? There's only one explanation, that God predicted it and promised it and foretold it. And therefore, our very existence is a Kiddush Hashem. That by keeping Hashem's Torah, his covenant with us, despite the fact that we've been persecuted in every single generation and we didn't have any physical means of defending ourselves, yet all those ancient civilizations, there's no Amalekites, and go to Boston or to Chicago or to California or to Melbourne, Australia, or South Africa, or anywhere in the world, and find me an Amalekite or a Hittite or a Jebusite. They're gone. There's no remnants of them. There's no Babylonians, and there's no Greeks, and there's no Romans, and there's none of them. And here, the ancient Jewish nation of Israel lives on. The children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel. Why? Because God told Abraham, I'll make you an eternal nation, your descendants. That our very existence is a Kiddush Hashem. But then when we act in the ways of God and follow his precepts and his commandments, and as the verse says, you will guard my mitzvot and perform them, then I'm your God. And then you will not desecrate the name of God, but rather I will be sanctified amongst the Jewish people. And all of us are so proud to be Jewish, especially since October 7th, when we see the strength, the resilience, the courage, the bravery, the selflessness, the generosity, the love, the unity of the Jewish people. That is a Kiddush Hashem, because the world sees it as well. And that is the ultimate commandment of this week's Torah portion. Now, we now get to chapter 23. After we talk about the Kohanim and sacredness and sanctity and holiness and all of us being a holy nation and sanctifying God's name and not desecrating God's name, now we transition from individuals who are holy, namely the Kohanim, the high priest, and the Jewish people, to times that are holy. They are holy people and they are holy times. And in this week's Torah portion, the Torah portion is called a Parashah. But it's almost like a parasha within a parasha, a Torah portion within a Torah portion. Because there's something called Parshat HaMoadim, the portion of the holidays. And it's read on many of the holidays from this Torah portion. So we have the Parshat HaMoadim, the portion of the holidays, within the portion of Emor. And that's chapter 23 of the book of Leviticus. And basically, it's the Jewish calendar of all the Jewish holidays. But the way it begins is God tells Moshe, speak to the children of Israel and tell them, Mo'adei Hashem, the holidays of God, asher tikru otam mikroi kodesh, that you shall designate as holy times or convocations, as it says. These are my appointed festivals. Without going any further, a very key word is moadim. We usually say chagim. Chag is like a festival because it's the festivals. But it's interesting, if you look in the Torah, it doesn't say chagai, my holidays, my festivals. It says moadei, my appointed, designated times. The word moed, we know the tent of meeting, which is the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was called Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. So the real meaning of holidays in Hebrew is the meeting times. In other words, we can't spend every day with God fully. We have to work, we have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to do mundane things. So, of course, within the day, we have times of prayer, times of Torah study, times of charity. We have times where we meet God. But then there's holidays, periods on the calendar that God says, these are my meeting times, my designated times for us to meet. So imagine you open your calendar and it says Tuesday at 2:00, you're meeting this person, and Wednesday you're meeting this. You have all your meetings, you have a doctor's appointment, you have whatever appointments you have. And then, as Ilan Gold, the comedian, says, the only calendar in the world that has not only days, but times is a Jewish calendar. There's times in a Jewish, which other calendar has times? Because it tells you when to light your candles on Friday night and on the holidays. Why? Because it means that at 6:18 is candle lighting. That's the time you have a meeting with God. And how long is the meeting going to last? Till Saturday night, 7:24, whatever the time is, right? It's a long 25-hour meeting. Same thing with Rosh Hashanah and with Yom Kippur and Sukkot and Pesach and Shavuot, designated meeting time. So in advance, not just for the next month, but for the rest of your life. You could look up in 25 years from now when Rosh Hashanah is, when Yom Kippur is, and you're going to know that at this and this time, on this and this day, let's just randomly, September 14th at 7:42 in the year 2050, okay, in 26 years from now, you're going to light your holiday candles for Rosh Hashanah, and you're going to have a meeting with God. And what are you going to talk about for Rosh Hashanah? You're going to talk with, and you even know the subject of the meeting. The meeting is to discuss the beginnings of our lives, new cycles of life, beginning a new Rosh Hashanah, right? And then Yom Kippur, you're having a meeting with God in 10, 20, 30, 40, the rest of your life. Every year you're going to have a meeting with God. And what are you going to talk about for 25 hours? Forgiveness, asking for forgiveness from God, forgiving other people, or asking, right? Every holiday has a theme and a time and a day that you got to meet with God and talk about it. So what is the word Moed? It's more than a festival. There are lots of festivals in the world. No shortage of festivals. We just had Sunfest. That's a festival on Flagler. Different kind of a festival. Our festivals are meeting times. It's a time with man and God are meeting. All of our meetings are man and man. You're meeting your friend, your doctor, your lawyer, your business associate. But these are holy meetings. That's why it's called Mikroi Kodesh, holy convocations. God and man are meeting. And imagine, God is taking the time to meet with you. Imagine how excited you would be if you got an invitation to have a meeting with whoever you really admire, the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Israel, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, whoever. You would be looking forward to that meeting. I can't believe it. I'm getting to meet. I think there's some kind of charity events that they auction off a lunch with Warren Buffett. And I think people bid like fortune, like $1 million to have lunch with, more maybe, I don't know. To have a meeting with Warren Buffett. I could spend an hour with Warren Buffett. Wow. You would be so excited. If you were going to the White House, you're having a meeting with the president, you'd be so excited. Okay? Meeting with the president of Israel, you'll be so excited. Well, God says, I have a meeting with you. Every single Shabbat is my meeting time. And that's the first meeting time. 6 days you shall work. On the seventh day shall be a day of rest. And again, it's called a meeting time with God. So remember that. And I just want to take it one step further. And that is that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says, what's the difference between a to-do list and a calendar? He said, to-do list is like a long list of things you got to do. Sometimes you get around to doing it. Sometimes you don't get around to doing it. Sometimes you say, let's have coffee, let's have lunch. Yeah, okay, let's do it. But it doesn't mean you're doing it. But if you say, okay, when are we meeting? Tuesday, 12 o'clock at this and this location. Now it's in your calendar. It's going to happen, right? And that's why God says, I'm going to book in advance all the meeting times that we're going to get together, God and the Jewish people, and God and every individual, and spend together. So those are the holidays, often called holidays or chagim, but really, literally, Mo'adei Hashem, the meeting times. Now, what is the first meeting time? What's ironic is we usually don't think of it as a holiday, but the first holiday listed in this week's Torah portion is Shabbat. 6 days you shall work, and the seventh day you shall rest. Now, Shabbat is very different than the rest of the holidays. Why? Because Shabbat was instituted by God. God made the world in 6 days, rested on the seventh day, and said, therefore, you shall work for 6 days and rest on the seventh day. So every 7 days it comes around. We just had a member of our shul this past Shabbat, not this week, the week before. He celebrated his 70th birthday. And he made a kiddush. His wife made a kiddush for him. It was a nice celebration. And I said, at the kiddush, I said, when you celebrate your 70th birthday, that means that 10 years of your life was celebrating Shabbat. If you celebrate every seventh day, and now you turn 70, the 10 whole years of your life was one long Shabbat, so to speak, right? So God says 1 day a week, during the week you're busy working, whatever activities you have to do. 1 day a week you connect with God because it's a meeting time with God and the Jewish people. The Jewish community comes together, pray for Torah study, for family, for all the higher spiritual pursuits of life. And it's for everyone. In the other religions, holy people live in a monastery or ashrams or whatever they do to be spiritual. God says you're a physical person. You have your physical activities, but 1 day a week you should elevate yourself to a higher spiritual plane. Especially today with technology, you turn off your phones and your computers and your televisions, and you focus on your soul, not just your body. Although your body enjoys Shabbat too, you have good food and celebration and l'chaim and everything else. So Shabbat is instituted by God, but holidays are based on calendar events. So let's say we're now counting from Passover to Shavuot. One of the holidays is Passover. The other one is Shavuot. Passover is the Exodus from Egypt. Shavuot is receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai 50 days later. But here's the difference. Shabbat is like a gift from God. The Talmud actually refers to Shabbat as a gift. And it is a gift. If you experience Shabbat, you know what a gift it is to get a day off. And by the way, the Torah says the Ten Commandments, not just you, but your servants, your maidservants, and your animals have to rest. Even your animals cannot work. Your ox deserves a day off. It doesn't have to plow on the holiday, your horse, whatever it is. Even not humans get a day of rest, but also your employees get a day of rest. And this is a gift the Jewish people gave to the whole world. They may have chosen Sunday, but the idea of a day off is a Jewish concept from Hashem and the Torah that God gave us and we gave to the world. And that your employees should get a day off as well. But the difference is that Shabbat, God created and determined. But the holidays is a partnership between man and God, right? Because history is written by God and man together. So the creation of the world was by God himself, because man wasn't around till the sixth day. And therefore, God gave us the gift of 6 days you shall work, and the seventh day you shall rest. But the holidays are God's partnering with man to write history. So you could look at time in two ways. There's cyclical time, like around and around, and linear time. Nature is secular, right? 6 days a week, Shabbat. 6 days a week, Shabbat. 4 seasons of the year, right? Every year you go through all the seasons. It's agricultural. And there's an agricultural component to the holidays as well. That's God as he's manifested in nature. Nature was created by God. But then there is the cultural, historical part of time. Jewish history, human history, which is linear. It's moving towards a destination, which is the era of redemption of Mashiach, the light at the end of the tunnel. And that history is written by man's actions in partnership with God. Yeah, we came back in 1948, but God didn't do it on his own. It took the courage and the bravery and the pioneering spirit of that generation to return to Israel with God's miraculous help and blessings. So it's a partnership. So the holidays is the sanctification of time through Israel, the Jewish people, and God in partnership, as opposed to Shabbat, which is holy, designated, and gifted to us from above. But yet Shabbat is one of these holy meeting times. I just want to point out a very deep and profound interpretation of the Vilna Gaon, who is known to be very deep and profound. And he says, why does it begin with 6 days you should work and rest on the seventh day? So he says, how many holy days are there? So if you read through the holidays, you have Rosh Hashanah, you have Yom Kippur, you have the first and last day of Sukkot, so we're up to 4 days, right? Then you have the first and last day of Pesach, which are holy days. And the seventh holy day is Shavuot. Now, in Israel, Shavuot is a one-day holiday. And even Rosh Hashanah is a one-day holiday. We keep 2 days because we don't know which day it is. But it's really, biblically, a one-day holiday. So there are 7 holy days. There is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, first and last day of Sukkot, first and last day of Pesach, and Shavuot. What's the difference between Yom Kippur and all the other 6 holidays? Yom Kippur has the status of Shabbat. On the other holidays, you're allowed to cook, you're allowed to carry. On Yom Kippur, it's like Shabbat. Shabbat Shabbaton, it's the Shabbat of all Shabbats. So he says 6 days you shall work, meaning there's limited work that's permitted on the other 6 holidays, but not the 7th day, which is Yom Kippur, which is the Holy of Holy. So that's another way to look at it. Now, I want to talk about the counting of the Omer, because we're in the midst of the counting of the Omer, and the counting of the Omer is in this week's Torah portion. The mitzvah that we're doing each and every day by counting the Omer is in this week's Torah portion. So what does the Torah say? That from the day after Passover, you should count 49 days, and the 50th day is Shabbat, is Shavuot. Now, what's interesting about this is that the name of the holiday is Shavuot. Shavuot literally means weeks. Everyone knows the song Shavuot Tov, a good week, a good week. We sing it after Havdalah. Why is it called the holiday of Shavuot? Because it comes 7 weeks after the Exodus from Egypt. Incidentally, today is 3 weeks, 21 days into the Omer. So we have 4 more weeks to go. And the 50th day is Shavuot. Now, what's unique about Shavuot is there's no date in the calendar. It just says count 7 weeks from Pesach and you'll get to Shavuot. And the answer why that is because it's a continuation of Pesach. Pesach, we went physically free. But going out physically is not enough. We now have to go out spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. And therefore, the Torah is the way to elevate ourselves to the giving of the Torah, counting the days. And that's the way we manage to free ourselves internally. And that's a very powerful message, right? We are a free nation living in America, right? But there are many things that constrain us, constrict us, confine us, inhibit us, weaken us, God forbid. And freedom doesn't just mean being physically able to move about and go freely wherever you want to go, but to be spiritually free, which means not to live with fear, but to live with faith. Okay, not to live with negative thoughts, but to live with optimism, right? So remember that without the Torah, we're not free. That's why the Talmud says there's no free person except someone who engages in Torah. And you may say, well, Torah imposes limitations and restrictions on my freedom. I can't do this in Shabbat. I can't eat this food. I can't wear this clothing. How am I free by keeping Torah? And the answer is because it teaches you how to be spiritually, emotionally free. So a person who is addicted or whatever it may be to negative behaviors or substances, God forbid, right? They're not free. They're free to go do what they want, but sometimes we're our own worst enemy. And therefore our freedom, God forbid, is destructive. So that's the counting of the Omer that we're doing right now, getting to the holiday of Shavuot. Now, we all know that each holiday has a historical event, the Exodus from Egypt, giving a Torah Mount Sinai. And then, of course, Sukkot is when we commemorate that God took us in the desert and carried us with his divine protection for 40 years in the desert, and that's why we eat in the Sukkah. So the holiday of Sukkot is all about faith in God, trusting in God, even when we're vulnerable, exposed to different threats, like in the desert, and there's insecurity and uncertainty in the desert, and to recognize we're all in that state of insecurity. Even when you feel confident and secure, we all know the adage, life can change in a moment, right? So every moment we have to be humble and vulnerable and realize we're dependent on Hashem. But our vulnerability is not our weakness, it's our strength, because it's the ability, even in the midst of uncertainty, to have resilience and strength. And where does that come from? Your faith in God. And that's the message of the desert, of the Sukkah. That's why it's called the Tabernacle of Peace. And again, here we are, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. And it's a very vulnerable time for the state of Israel and for the Jewish people everywhere. It's a time of great insecurities and uncertainty about the future. Nobody knows. A lot of challenges, hostages, tragically, and what's going to be with all the people who live in the south and the north, and we have Iran and Hezbollah, right? But that's the whole message of Sukkot in this week's Torah portion. And it's ironic that the war began on the last day of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, in Israel, and for us. Are you able to hear me? Someone texted me that there's a lack of clarity. Is it coming through clear? It is? It's fine? Okay, good. So Sukkot is very, very relevant to the times we're living in, because we're living like in that little hut that the winds and the times are blowing, and it's very challenging. Something I always find fascinating, and I love to point this out, is I told you it begins with Shabbat, and then it goes to Sukkot, and then Shmini Atzeret, and then it continues. I'm sorry, it starts with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Pesach, and then Shavuot. And that's the end of the biblical holidays, the 7 holidays I mentioned, right? And then we changed the channel, chapter 24, a new topic, sort of going back to the Kohanim in the beginning of the Torah portion. And what does it say? The Jewish people should bring oil for Aaron to light the menorah daily in the temple. And you may say, what's the connection between bringing the oil to the menorah? Why isn't the oil of the menorah maybe in the beginning of the Torah portion when we talk about the Kohanim, and one of the roles of the Kohanim and the high priest was to light the menorah? But fascinatingly, we know that there are all these biblical holidays, the 7 we mentioned, and then we have 2 rabbinic holidays that came later in history. One is Hanukkah in the time of the Greeks, the victory of the Maccabees over the Hellenists, Syrian Greek armies. And then Purim, the victory of the Jewish people, Mordechai and Esther over Haman and Achashverosh. After we finish the last biblical holiday, which is Sukkot, which is described here, and by the way, the Torah also tells us to bring the 4 species, the lulav, the etrog, the hadassim, and sit in the sukkah for 7 days, all the commandments. All of a sudden, we turn to chapter 24. And what does chapter 24 talk about? Bringing oil for the menorah. Which holiday follows Sukkot after biblical times? The rabbinic holiday of Hanukkah. So here we have the menorah, which is the prelude to the miracle of the menorah in the time of the Syrian Greeks, and the miracle of the lights, of the oil burning for 8 days, which follows the holiday of Sukkot. So from Sukkot, we go to the menorah, implying that there'll be future holidays that will be rabbinic of nature, like the lighting of the menorah. And again, the lighting of the menorah is a physical act, but light represents illumination. It's a spiritual thing, light. Everything in this world follows the laws of gravity, goes downward. The flames go up, heavenward. The whole idea is, like, our soul is always striving to go higher. That's why King Solomon says, Ner Hashem, the candle of God, is the soul of man. So Aaron lighting the menorah represents Aaron's job. There are different branches, 7 branches in the tabernacle menorah. There are different types of souls, different souls with different missions and ways of connecting to God in this world is not one way. And Aaron has to kindle those flames, elevate them, raise them up. And by the way, the whole idea of the Kohanim is from parents to children. It's about education. It's about transmission of Jewish values. For the Kohanim, it's their specific rule. Being a Kohen for all Jewish people, it's the special rules of being Jewish. But the whole idea of kindling the flame is what every parent has to do and every teacher to elevate their souls, to ignite, to inspire the flame within every single person, every Jew. And that's the commandment of the lighting of the menorah. But who has to bring the oil to the Kohen? That's the job of the Jewish people. We have to bring ourselves to the Kohen and say, here's the oil, here's our potential. Now help ignite it, help raise it up, help elevate us in the service and connection to Hashem. So it's about the Kohanim, but also the Kohanim doing their job, which is to inspire the nation to be a nation of Kohanim, of servants of Hashem in this world. Well, how does the Torah portion end? Everyone likes the story, right? Well, there's actually a story at the end of this week's Torah portion. So we end the Torah portion with a story. And what is the story in this week's Torah portion? It's a story about an individual, and we know his name. Actually, we don't know his name. I'm sorry. We know his mother's name. His mother's name was Shlomit Bat Divri, from the tribe of Dan. And the Torah only tells us that a Jewish mother and an Egyptian father, and a fight broke out in the camp of Israel between the son of the Israelite woman and the Egyptian father, and an Israelite man. So a fight breaks out. And then in the fight, what happens? The son of the Israelite woman curses God, commits the sin of blasphemy. And Moses doesn't know what to do with him. What is the punishment for blasphemy, for cursing God? And for some background, Rashi brings from the Midrash, from a Rabbi Barachia, who says why did a fight break out? He was scoffing the laws of the showbread, which we just read about. And another Israelite rebuked him for speaking so disrespectfully. They came to blows. And at that point, this man cursed God. So Moses puts him in prison, the Mishmar. Now, one of the interesting things is that in the Torah, there is no punishment of imprisonment, which is the most popular or most main form of punishment in America is prison, right? Well, not in the Torah. In the Torah, a person was either given a fine or lashes or capital punishment. But imprisonment is not a prescribed method in the Torah, except here as a temporary measure. And there's one other story. Someone was chopping wood on Shabbat. Moses didn't know the law. So as a temporary measure to apprehend the person and confine them until it's determined what should be done to this person. And the determination from God said to Moshe that this person should be taken and put to death, which he was. And that is the concluding story of this week's Torah portion. And again, we talked about sanctifying God's name. Here's a person who committed blasphemy, which, once again, the idea of our responsibility to bring blessing to the name of God. rather than, God forbid, a source of blasphemy or cursing or defaming, desecrating, dishonoring to Hashem's name. So it all sort of is connected to what we've been discussing earlier, which is the takeaway of this week's Torah portion of Kiddush Hashem. And Israel is a Kiddush Hashem. Of course, there are those who will always seek to desecrate the name of God and commit blasphemy by decrying Israel with all these absurd accusations, when the truth is the exact opposite, that the most moral army, the army that, helps their enemy get out of harm's way and, sends messages that we're coming in, leave, go to a safe place. We don't want to, and goes out of its way to save as many lives as they can, and provides humanitarian aid to their enemy during the time of war. None of this is precedented in human history or in any wars that are fought. So Israel is a Kiddush Hashem, but at the same time, the Torah tells us we have to defend and protect our lives. That's a moral responsibility that we have, and so Israel must do what it needs to do. But let us continue as a Jewish people, especially today, thinking about the meaning of Israel's Independence Day. And Israel is not a nation that was created in 1948. Our enemies call us colonizers. But the truth is that obviously God told Abraham 3,700 years ago, Lech Lecha, go to the land that I will show you. And then God brought the Jewish people from Egypt to the land of Israel. And we only returned in 1948 to our historical ancestral land. And today we celebrate the miracle of that return after the Holocaust, which was a Kiddush Hashem before the eyes of the world. And I'll just conclude by sharing with you what the Ger Rebbe, the Chidush Yerim, says. He says, what are the three major Chagim or Moadim festivals? We have three holidays, right? We have Pesach, which is the first, when God took us out of Egypt. Then we have Shavuot, when he gave us the Torah. And then we have Sukkot. We built the huts to remember the desert. And even though Sukkot comes after the high holidays, that's not the first of the cycle, because the story began with the Exodus from Egypt, when we became a Jewish nation. So he says something very beautiful. He says the whole relationship between God and the Jewish people could be compared to a marriage. God is the groom, we are his bride, where we have a marriage covenant with God that will be loyal and have fidelity to God and God to us. He says there are three steps in every marriage. There is the proposal, which we call engagement. We have the wedding, right? And then after you get married, you go home and you live happily ever after. He says that's the three holidays. Pesach is God's marriage proposal to us. He came, he selected us the way a man chooses a wife, a bride, and says, will you marry me? Will you be my nation? And God chose us from all the nations and took us out of Egypt. Then he took us to the wedding canopy, Mount Sinai. That was the location of the wedding canopy. And he gave us the Torah, which is the marriage contract, the rules of the relationship. And then he takes us home, which was the sukkah, the tabernacle he built for us. Even in the desert, he gave us shade and protection from the elements so we could live in a dwelling place with God, and then the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, but ultimately the land of Israel. That's our home. He gave us a home. So today we're celebrating that home that he gave us to live in, where the whole idea of a home is where you could model all the behaviors for your family of how you should conduct yourself. That's what parents do. And that's what we have to do in the land of Israel. In our relationship with God, we have to model to the world what a family, what the Jewish people as a family in their home, their homeland, look like and act and behave. And despite all the craziness in the media and social media and all the crazy college encampments, I believe we as a Jewish people are modeling to the world what does it mean to be a Jewish people, how we defend each other and protect each other and the courage and the selflessness and the sacrifice and the love and the unity and the generosity. This is what it means to be a family. And we are a nation, but we're more than a nation. We're a mishpacha, we're a family. And it all began with our relationship with God, which is what the holidays are all about, our union, our marriage to God, and God giving us a home to dwell in, which is the land of Israel. And that's why Israel is the only land that's called a holy land, because God dwells there with the Jewish people. And because God dwells there with the Jewish people, it is the Holy Land, because that's God's residence. So wish everyone a good day and look forward to seeing you in Shabbat. We're welcoming families from Israel this Shabbat to our synagogue. So if you're able to join us, we look forward to seeing you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.